Tatiana Cohen, and this is podcast Happy at Work. In our podcast, usually we discuss the people-centered approach for our business with experts from the different countries. And today my guest is Sam, and we will discuss a very interesting topic, joy at work. Hi, Sam.
Hi, Tatiana. How are you?
Oh, I'm fine, thanks. Sam, before we are starting, could you tell a little bit more about you and your professional background?
Yeah, sure. So I've been working in the world of employer research for well over 15 years now. So lots and lots of insight and data that I work through around all aspects of the employment experience. So whether that's employer value proposition, whether that's culture, engagement, internal communications, and then little offshoot side projects like trying to understand joy at work.
Uh, I really interested to know more about what is joy at work. How could you define it?
Well, yeah, and I suppose as part of the research, what I wanted to do was allow people to provide their own definition of it. We often talk about things like happiness at work or engagement at work, maybe contentment or satisfaction. And I wanted to just see if we could sort of take it up a level, I suppose, and see whether people experience joy at work. And I settled on the word joy because it is definitely something other and probably a little bit higher than happiness. And it's got parallels in other languages as well. There's joie in French, Freude in German. There's alegria in Spanish, and I think that's quite close to the Portuguese word as well.
Mhm.
And the Danish actually have a word for work joy, one of their compound nouns, which is something like arbeidsglød. That will be horrible pronunciation. I apologise to anybody Danish who's watching this. But yeah, it seemed like an interesting concept to try and explore. See if it exists, see if it's important to people, and if it does exist, what is it all about? And that's what I set to find out in my research.
Mhm. Uh, why do you think what joy at work also could be useful for the companies? And know about this concept could help companies, for example, increase and creativity, productivity, or to amplify the mm, from joy at work. They could also achieve the best atmosphere in the company. Could you share what they think? Why is it important to focus on joy at work?
Yeah, sure. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, the first thing we ask people is joy at work important? And we gave them a little bit of a steer about what we meant by joy. We tried not to lead them too much, but we talked about providing some sort of meaning at work, some sort of support, and in some way it's going to enhance your state of mind. So we didn't sort of box them in with a really firm definition, but we sort of gave them the areas that it might be about. And as I say, most people thought that was an important idea. We only had 9% of people that thought it was going to be unimportant. And oh yeah, so I mean that's important just to qualify what we did do. So the research was carried out in the UK. We did that via YouGov, so obviously a very well-respected panel that we tapped into with an audience of people of 300 people that sort of make up a typical representation of the UK population. So that's who we were asking about this. So the research is UK based, but there could well be applications in other countries as well. And in terms of what it was all about, we asked people, we gave them a very long list
Mhm.
of words, all of which were sort of positive, and asked them sort of pick and choose which of these is it about. And joy wasn't particularly about things like creativity or productivity, success, or freedom. They were some of the things that people said. Yeah, it's less about that. The words they did choose tended to be about concepts like recognition, satisfaction, doing a job well, meaningful work, uh, camaraderie and collaboration came out very strongly. And fun was quite a long way down the list, but laughter, in particular, was quite a long way up the list. So, yeah, there is something about that sort of feel good element of it. There's something about doing it with other people, and there's definitely it's sort of embodied by actually physically laughing at work. And I don't know. I mean, I don't. I'm just thinking about that now. I'm feeling better when I'm thinking about times when when I've laughed at work, and that seemed to have a really strong resonance for people.
Mhm. As a part of concept of happiness of a model paramount of Martin Seligman and the positive emotions, I think a joy at work it's also have a great impact on this positive emotion at work.
Yeah,
Uh, Sam, my next question for you, it's about how to build a company, how to build a team where joy at work become a part of culture.
yeah, and that's that's an interesting question, because we asked people, does your employer have a responsibility for trying to create this culture? So exactly to your question. And people absolutely thought that yes, they do. I think it was something like, sort of 70 or 75% of people said, yes, my employer has some sort of responsibility for creating this culture or atmosphere or environment or whatever where I can have joy at work. And and that can possibly come outside of my sort of primary tasks as well. Um, but we sort of put them on the spot a bit as well. And we asked people, well, doesn't this, wouldn't this be inefficient or unprofessional if you're having all this joy at work, all this laughter, all this collaboration with people that isn't absolutely about your work? And they quite strongly dismissed that idea. Actually, having that positivity, as you've described, in the workplace, that's going to make them feel better. It's going to make them more professional. It's going to make them more efficient. It's going to make them more productive. So that's very much the way people felt about it. So in terms of your question about what can an employer do to create this, um, uh, they definitely want to have connection with people. So that joy is going to come definitely from your colleagues. It's definitely going to come from your peer group. It might come through from service users. So if we think about people who are, in the service of people, and so probably more likely to be in public sector or third sector rather than a commercial environment. And we had, a lot of people like teachers or carers responded to this. And you can see in that direct connection, that is where a lot of joy is going to come from. It is going to come a bit less from customers, and people were a bit brutal. They said that joy definitely isn't going to come from their manager or their leader. So, to your question, creating time for you to be with people,
Mhm.
even if you're not actually being purely productive when you're having time with those people, actually that will make you more productive. That element of positivity, that connection, and just making you feel like you want to be there is really important to people. Um, there was, other aspects of this that came out. People want to feel like they've made an achievement. So recognizing people when they do, and again having that bit of time for recognition, and as appropriate. This is always a difficult topic about recognition because some people want it shouted to the world, and some people want a little very quiet pat on the back, and they don't want anybody else to know that you think they've done a great job. But appropriate recognition is definitely part of it, and some sort of meaning to their work. So letting people do what they do well, and again, telling them why that is important and why that's been valued.
Mhm. My next question for you, like a professional in employer branding.
Mm,
You have been working a lot in this area, and from your side, what do you think? If a company decided to create joy at work as a part
mm.
of culture, but also how could it influence employer brand of the company inside and outside organization?
Well, that's really interesting because again, we sort of in these sort of contrasting questions that we have. Um, yes, people are expecting an employer to sort of create these conditions. No, they don't think that that is unprofessional or inefficient, but they are not they're not looking for that in their next role. So it's something they really value. It's something that they really want, but from their next employer, uh, and therefore, from employer branding that they're exposed to, they're not expecting to see joy in that. And so that does feel like there is a potential opportunity there. Um, and just over the past couple of days, McDonald's have released some sort of employer branding material, which is showing the interactions, in an extremely busy and hectic environment. It's showing the kinds of interactions you have with your colleagues, and also with customers as well. And it was just sort of starting to tip into some of this area about that connection, and having, being extremely busy, being extremely professional, but just having that little bit of time to have that connection, that sort of collaborative atmosphere, and definitely, absolutely time to have a bit of a laugh. This, McDonald's should be a fun brand, so they're showing that as well. And I thought that was really nicely shown. And yeah, I think there's lots of opportunity, to surprise people here, and to show that, authentic is a massively overused word in employer branding. That is one of the ways in which you can show authenticity, and almost nothing can be more authentic than laughter. That is something you cannot create. People are laughing, and enjoying themselves, or they're not. I think that's a tremendous way that employers can be authentic in their employer branding.
Mhm. I want to ask you also about employer branding. Times to times, the company is really very, very serious in their employer branding communication. We try to keep themselves like a corporate, not like the organization is really people oriented. The tone of voice usually is more formal than usual. What could you recommend to companies who want to add a little bit more info about joy at work, especially if they had it inside, for
Mm.
their employer branding communication?
That's a really interesting it's a really interesting question, and I tried to sort of consider, is there any kind of sort of occupation that is unsuitable, for joy, as a concept. And I suppose a little bit morbidly, started thinking about, sort of an undertaker, or somebody dealing with death. Um, and then thought, no, that's entirely the wrong way of thinking about it. Yes, in that kind of profession, you must be utterly professional, and you must be utterly respectful, but you're actually trying to create a celebration of somebody's life, that should be, in a strange kind of way, there should be ultimate opportunity for joy in that kind of thing. So it came down to, yeah, it came down to probably, law enforcement, the legal world, accountancy, those kinds of things, where you do need to be incredibly professional. You do need to absolutely follow the rules and the guidelines, and part of why people will choose you as a customer or as an employee is because you're able to do that. So I suppose then it becomes about the meaning of that work and the satisfaction that you can take from it. One thing also I haven't mentioned yet actually is that brought people joy is when things just work. When you get into that real flow state, when there isn't any friction in your working day as well. That's another thing that people described as bringing them joy. Um, and I think we could all probably recognize those are slightly rare. But if an organization can show that actually it's really got things worked out, it's really going to make your working life as easy as it possibly can, that you can do meaningful work. And then maybe afterwards, maybe once you've finished being completely professional and straight-laced and very buttoned up, there probably is that opportunity for you to reflect on that with your colleagues and with your peers. And those are probably times where that joy is able to come through.
Mhm. My next question is about cross-cultural issue. When
Okay.
and I know what our research were based on the UK respondents, but if you talk about globally, what could you recommend to companies who want to add more joy at work on a global level, and also to show it to the different world? What recommendation could you give to these companies?
That's interesting. Um, I mean, I suppose humor is extremely culture dependent, but laughter, I suppose, is universal. Um, and I think that probably ties into the challenge, of which has been spoken by many people, and many people much more expert than me, about the opportunities for connection where we increasingly work remotely. And sometimes that is by design, and that people work from home or other locations far more often, particularly post-pandemic.
Mhm.
But also in a multinational company, we can't fly everybody to be together all of the time. And I suppose people are, or organizations are increasingly working on, if we're not going to be together as much, how can we build that connection between our people? And they are probably coming at it from innovation and opportunities for collaboration, and they're probably thinking about it through a lens of productivity, and they're maybe not thinking about that through a pure connection as humans to each other, and then the opportunity to connect there. So that's a really long way round, as my brain just ticked over there, of thinking about. I think it's about giving people time to connect. And if we're thinking probably in a multinational about quite a professional and sort of a white collar sort of occupation. I think if we take it down to a sort of a more blue collar and hands-on occupation, it's about, you can spend your time as a manager in those organizations, chivvying people along, stopping conversations dead, making sure people are just getting on with their work the entire time, and actually recognizing actually those moments outside of the work are probably going to make people work better, more productively, more engaged throughout. And I think we could all do well to reflect on that.
Mhm. Sen, next question is about cross-generational situation. I
Mm,
remember the time in the past we talk about job like about something what you need to do very seriously. You need to work very hard, and so you couldn't look at your job as a source of enjoyment of your life.
mm,
As I talk now about young generation, I see the situation a little bit different. People expect what their work really will be a source of positive emotions, a source of
Mm.
connections that are people and so on. From a perspective maybe of your research, do you have any insights about cross-generational issues and for which generation, for example, concept of joy work will be look better or how to implement it, for example, if you have more older people in your organization, could you share your ideas?
Yeah, sure. Well, what we did find in the research is, and we had lots of different ways in which we could segment the data. We could look at people's socioeconomic status. We could look at people's faith, even whether or not they had faith, and we were wondering whether people with faith were more joyful than others, and you know to a slight degree, but not important, not significantly. What we did find was that the women and younger people were experiencing less joy at work. And so, in terms of the younger people, yes, I think you're absolutely right in terms of wanting it to be a positive experience and to have positive emotions. But I wonder if two things are going on for younger people. One, navigating the professional world, and understanding some of the ways in which you can work and which you need to work, and undoubtedly, older generations wanting to communicate much more verbally than probably younger people are used to or immediately comfortable with. So therefore, it's probably going to be harder to be yourself in the workplace as a younger person, and probably always was, and maybe it's just a little bit more now, especially if, again, you're not with all of your colleagues all of the time. It's going to that sort of learning or adjustment curve, I suppose, is going to take longer. And secondly, I wonder about sort of security of work, particularly for young people, particularly at the
Mm.
moment, um, and whether or not to, you know, frankly, to be seen to be having fun, they might be a bit less comfortable with that being professional, and if their job is feeling a bit precarious at the minute, then perhaps they're going to want to try and play it very straight and not be seen to be having fun at work. That's a miserable thing to think about, isn't it? But maybe that is happen, and maybe maybe earlier in their career, maybe their work is just a bit more precarious. Maybe the work is just a little bit more transactional than they're hoping for later in their career, and therefore maybe they don't have that opportunity.
Mhm. We are living in a world with a lot of stress because we have a so awful situation in the world. So, for example, from the war until the economic situation and great changes of our life. What do you think in this situation? Joy at work, uh, is it a good concept for helping people to live and work in this tough situation, or we should be more serious? What to think about the context in which we are living and where we could implement this concept?
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting lens, isn't it? And I do an awful lot of work at my desk. And it is very easy and sometimes useful to sort of distract myself by tapping into the news or into social media. And that doesn't always make me feel good about things. Um, and yeah, I mean, I guess at times work should be a distraction from some of your sort of everyday issues. I think a lot of people would sort of recognize that and buy into that idea. Um, and particularly, yeah, I suppose if you imagine the scenario that your employer is able to be quite open with you, and quite encouraging of people to want to be quite joyful at work. To almost put a metric, almost put a KPI on the amount of laughter that they hear in their workplace. There we go. I'm painting a rather nicer picture now, aren't I? I can absolutely see the value in that, not only for the employee, but particularly for individuals, of work being a really positive distraction. We all want to work. There are very few people that go to work not wanting to do a good job, even if they consider it to be very, very transactional, and that that I will do the bare minimum for the pay I am getting, and I'm not doing a stroke more, and then I'm going home and I'm not thinking about it. Even those people, that bare minimum they want to do, they want to do that as well as possible. And people have that intrinsic motivation within them. So yeah, why wouldn't they want to do it well, and why wouldn't they want to enjoy themselves while they're there?
Sam, and my last questions for you, which I usually ask all my guests in the end of our conversation. It's a question about three main tips which you could give to the companies. For our conversation is three main tips which you could give to companies who want to implement a conception of joy at work.
Absolutely. So one, I think, is that time, and this is probably the major one, is to think about time in terms of long-term gains versus those short-term wins. And so if you see those opportunities for people to get together and really build connections with each other as humans, and find that time to connect and therefore laugh with one another, to see that as an extremely positive aspect of your culture at that organization, and therefore something to be celebrated. So I suppose that's thinking about time in that regard. I suppose as well, finding those ways to sort of recognize and mark people's achievements, because that sense of satisfaction can then sort of be elevated into joy as well. I suppose that would be my second tip. I suppose finally, don't be shy of showing this externally as well. As I say, this is something that people are looking for. They maybe don't go looking for it in their next employer, and they're not maybe necessarily thinking their next employer is going to show this aspect of working life to them. But actually, it's something that is really valuable to them. So yeah, stick joy in your employer branding. I don't think I cannot see a negative consequence of having more joy in your employer branding.
Sam, thanks a lot for this conversation. Thanks a lot for this interesting topic about joy at work. Thanks for participating.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to, hopefully spread a little joy.
It's for me, it's also a great joy of my work as a host of podcast Happy at Work. Thanks a lot. And this is podcast Happy at Work. My name is Tatiana Koval. Stay connected.